The morning after my wedding, my wife asked, "Do you care if my boyfriend comes over?" Boyfriend? I nearly dropped the mug. She laughed while scrolling through her phone. "Sorry, I meant my ex-boyfriend. He's coming over for breakfast, so maybe you should leave." The casualness in her voice made my blood run cold. She didn't even look up from her screen. Her thumb kept swiping like she was browsing Instagram instead of destroying our marriage before it had even begun. Why would I leave? Who the hell is this guy? I set the coffee down harder than necessary. The mug made a sharp crack against the granite countertop. The same countertop where we'd shared champagne 12 hours ago, where she'd sat in her wedding dress eating leftover cake and telling me how happy she was. Coffee splashed over the rim and pooled around the base, but I didn't move to clean it. Carly finally looked up from her phone with an annoyed expression, like I was interrupting something important. "It's nothing. It's just Raul. He wants to see me." "Who the hell is Raul? You've made zero mention of any Rauls." My voice was getting louder. We'd been together for 3 years, engaged for 1, married for exactly 18 hours. She'd never mentioned anyone named Raul. Not during our relationship talks where we'd spent hours discussing our pasts. Not when we went through that couple's workbook the therapist recommended. Not even drunk at her bachelorette party when her sister asked about her exes and they all giggled about old boyfriends. I'd told her everything. About Jessica from college. About that disastrous thing with my coworker. Every embarrassing detail of my romantic history laid bare because that's what couples did. They shared everything. Or at least I thought they did. "It doesn't matter. Are you staying here or not? Raul is coming in 5 minutes." She said it like I was being unreasonable. 5 minutes. She'd already arranged this. Already told him to come over to our home the morning after our wedding. While I was in the shower, maybe. Or while I was getting the newspaper. Planning another man's visit while wearing the silk pajamas I'd bought her for the honeymoon. "I'm obviously staying. Unless you have a problem with me meeting Mr. ex-boyfriend Raul." I crossed my arms. Carly rolled her eyes dramatically. The same eye roll she used when I forgot to take out the trash or left dishes in the sink. But this wasn't about chores. This was about her inviting another man into our home less than a day after promising to love and honor me. Ugh, fine. "Just do me a favor and stay in the bedroom after you say hi." "No, this is my house. What's going on?" I was done being polite. My name was on the deed. I'd used my savings for the down payment, spent weekends painting these walls the exact shade of blue she wanted, installed those shelves she'd seen on Pinterest. This was supposed to be our forever home, and she wanted me to hide in the bedroom like I was the intruder. Before she could answer, there was a knock at the door. 3 quick raps, like whoever was outside felt very comfortable being there. Like they'd knocked on this door before. Carly jumped up and smoothed down her silk pajamas, the same ones she'd worn on our wedding night, the ones that were supposed to be special. She tucked her hair behind her ears and checked her reflection in the hallway mirror. Actually checked her appearance for this guy while I stood there in yesterday's undershirt and boxers. She practically skipped to the door while I stood frozen in disbelief, her hand on the doorknob. The security chain we'd installed together jingling as she undid it. Everything moving in slow motion while my brain tried to catch up with what was happening. She opened the door, and in walked a man who looked like he'd stepped out of a cologne commercial. Tall with dark hair and one of those perfectly groomed beards that took effort to maintain. Square jaw, broad shoulders, the kind of guy who probably did CrossFit and talked about it. He was pulling an expensive-looking suitcase and wearing a leather jacket that probably cost more than our wedding cake. Carly literally jumped into his arms. Not a polite hug, not a friendly greeting. She launched herself at him like they did in movies. He lifted her off the ground and spun her around while she giggled. Her legs wrapped around his waist for a moment before he set her down. They hugged for way too long while I stood there watching my new wife embrace another man in our home. His hands on her lower back. Her face buried in his neck, and I think he got a hard-on. When he finally put her down, she was glowing in a way I hadn't seen since our first dates. Raul noticed me and walked over with his hand extended like this was all perfectly normal. "Hi, thanks so much for letting me stay here." She was tired of visiting me at the hotel. His accent was thick, Italian. I shook his hand on autopilot while my brain tried to process what he'd just said. Stay here, visiting him, hotel. The words bounced around my skull, refusing to make sense. "You've been visiting him at the hotel?" I turned to Carly. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Raul made himself comfortable on our couch. He told me, "Of course. After all, she's my girlfriend." The words hung in the air like a bad smell that wouldn't go away. My brain kept replaying them over and over while I stood there staring at this stranger sitting on my couch. Carly suddenly got real interested in the magazines on the coffee table, straightening them and restacking them like they were the most important thing in the world. She wouldn't look at me. Her hands kept moving the same 3 magazines around while the silence stretched out between all of us. My mouth opened and closed a few times before I finally managed to get words out. How exactly is this supposed to work? Raul's face scrunched up in confusion, and he looked between me and Carly like he was missing something obvious. He shifted on the couch and cleared his throat. "I thought you knew about us continuing our relationship during your engagement." His thick accent made the words sound almost apologetic. "Carly told me you had an understanding about keeping previous relationships active." My hands started shaking. So bad I had to shove them in my pockets. The room felt like it was spinning, and I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. Carly still wouldn't look up from those damn magazines. I need a minute. The words came out rougher than I meant them to. I turned and walked to the kitchen on legs that felt like jelly. My phone was on the counter where I'd left it earlier, and I grabbed it with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. Luke's number was in my favorites, and I hit it without thinking. He picked up on the second ring with his usual cheerful greeting, but I cut him off. Something's happening. Carly's ex is here, and he thinks they're still together. The words tumbled out in a rush. Luke went quiet for a second, then asked where I was. Home. Can you come over? He said he'd be there in 20 minutes and told me not to do anything stupid until he got there. I leaned against the counter and tried to get my breathing under control. From the living room, I could hear Carly's voice, all sweet and helpful like she was giving a house tour. My feet carried me back to the doorway, and I watched her pointing out where we kept things. She was showing him the coffee maker and explaining how it worked. Then she grabbed the mugs we'd gotten as wedding gifts, the ones with our initials on them, and started making him an espresso. She knew exactly how he liked it without asking. 2 sugars and a splash of milk. The casual way she moved around our kitchen making another man coffee made my stomach turn inside out. Raoul sat at our breakfast bar like he belonged there, scrolling through his phone while she worked. 20 minutes felt like 20 hours, but finally there was a knock at the door. I practically ran to open it, and Luke took one look at my face and pulled me into a quick hug. He walked into the living room and surveyed the scene, with Carly and Raoul sitting together on the couch now. Let's all sit down and talk this through calmly. His voice had that steady tone he used when things got crazy. Raoul looked up from his coffee and seemed genuinely surprised by the tension in the room. I don't want to cause problems. Carly rolled her eyes and muttered something about everyone being dramatic for no reason. Luke sat in the armchair, and I took the other chair across from the couch. When did you start seeing Raoul again? The question came out before I could stop it. Carly finally looked at me and shrugged like it was no big deal. 3 months into our engagement. It just happened when he messaged me on social media. She tucked her hair behind her ear the way she did when she was nervous. We've been meeting at the downtown Marriott every Tuesday and Thursday while you thought I was at book club. The words hit me like punches to the gut. All those nights she came home talking about the books they'd discussed. All those times she said the meetings ran late. Luke leaned forward in his chair and looked at Raoul. What exactly did Carly tell you about their relationship? Raoul's answer made everything so much worse. She said they were getting married for practical reasons, health insurance and tax benefits. He looked genuinely confused by our reactions. She told me you both agreed the relationship was just on paper, and you were aware of us continuing to see each other. My laptop was sitting on the side table, and I grabbed it before I could think about what I was doing. The shared calendar popped up, and I turned the screen toward everyone. Look at this. Every Tuesday and Thursday for 3 months. My finger pointed at the book club entries. Then I switched tabs to our credit card statement. And here are the hotel charges that match up perfectly. Carly lunged forward and tried to grab the laptop from my hands. You're invading my privacy. The irony of her saying that after everything she'd done wasn't lost on Luke, who actually laughed. Raoul stood up and rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable for the first time since he'd arrived. Maybe I should leave until you sort this out. Carly immediately jumped up and grabbed his arm. No! You drove 4 hours to see me and I promised you the weekend. I stood up too and looked him straight in the eye. You're welcome to leave. In fact, I insist on it. The room went quiet again and Carly's face turned red. She spun on her heel and stormed off toward our bedroom, our marriage bed where we'd been together just last night. The door slammed so hard the pictures on the wall shook. Raoul stood there, awkwardly for a moment before walking over to his suitcase. Luke got up and helped him carry it to the door, while I stood frozen in place. Before he left, Raoul pulled out his phone and showed me his contact screen. Here's my number if you need any information about what Carly told me. I saved it automatically, while my brain tried to process everything that had just happened in the last hour. 20 minutes after Raoul's car disappeared down the street, another car pulled into the driveway, and Chelsea walked up holding a box from the bakery and a tray of coffee. Luke's wife always knew when to show up with food, and she gave me a quick hug before setting everything on the kitchen counter. She worked as a paralegal at a firm downtown and started pulling papers from her bag while I poured coffee into clean mugs. The word annulment came out of her mouth and made my stomach drop because hearing it said out loud made this whole mess feel real in a way it hadn't before. While she explained the legal stuff, I grabbed my laptop and pulled up our Ring doorbell app to check something that had been bothering me. The footage loaded, and I scrolled back through the past month finding exactly what I was afraid of. Tuesday night 2 weeks ago showed someone arriving at 11 p.m. when I was in Chicago for that conference. The figure wore a leather jacket, and even in the grainy black and white video, I could see it was Raoul walking up to my front door. More scrolling showed 3 other late-night visits, and each time stamp matched nights I was working late or out of town. My chest got tight, and I had to put the laptop down because seeing the proof made it harder to breathe. Chelsea looked at the screen and immediately said we needed to secure all my important stuff right away before things got worse. We spent the next 3 hours going through the house taking pictures of everything valuable and backing up all my financial records onto a flash drive. Luke helped carry boxes of documents and my grandmother's jewelry to his truck, while Chelsea made an inventory list on her phone. The whole time, Carly stayed locked in the bedroom with music blasting so loud the walls vibrated. Around 6 that evening, she finally came out acting like nothing had happened and walked into the kitchen asking what we were having for dinner. I told her we needed to talk about what happened this morning, but she just rolled her eyes and said I was ruining her happiness. She actually stood there in our kitchen and told me I never let her be herself, like somehow I was the bad guy in this situation. The argument got louder until she stormed back to the bedroom and slammed the door again, while Luke and Chelsea watched from the living room. I changed all the passwords on our Netflix and Amazon accounts that night and made myself a bed on the couch with spare blankets from the hall closet. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up to hear Carly on the phone, and even through the bedroom door, I could hear her giggling and whispering to someone. Every little laugh felt like someone twisting a knife in my back because I knew she was talking to Raul about their plans. The next morning, I called my boss and told him I needed a personal day, then looked up the number Chelsea had given me for Nolan Ramos. His secretary said he could see me at 2 o'clock and told me to bring any documentation about our assets and debts. The reality that my one-day-old marriage was already heading for divorce hit me hard, and I had to sit down at the kitchen table. Carly came out around noon dressed in yoga pants and announced she was going to her sister's house for the day. Something made me check her location on my phone after she left, and sure enough, the little dot showed her at the Marriott downtown, not at her sister's place. I took a screenshot of the map showing her location and saved it to the folder Chelsea had told me to create for evidence. Then I turned off my own location sharing, because if she wanted to play games with deception, I could play them too. The attorney's office was in a tall building downtown, and Nolan turned out to be a guy in his 50s with gray hair who'd clearly seen this kind of thing before. He explained that getting an annulment might work, since Carly had entered the marriage while lying about her relationship with Raul. The legal terms made my head spin, but he said her deception and fraud could qualify for ending the marriage without a full divorce. He gave me a stack of forms to fill out and said we'd need to document everything, including the hotel charges and doorbell footage. When I got home that afternoon, Carly's sister was sitting in my living room waiting for me with her arms crossed. She started talking immediately about how this was all just a big misunderstanding, and Carly and Raul were just friends now. I pulled out my laptop and showed her the credit card statements with all the hotel charges and watched her face change. She switched tactics and said I should be more evolved about relationships and that monogamy was outdated anyway. I told her to leave and she huffed out the door saying I'd regret this when Carly took half of everything. That night, while Carly was still out, I called a locksmith who came over and changed all the locks on the doors. Nolan had said I could legally do it since only my name was on the house deed, and Carly had never paid any part of the mortgage. I texted Carly that her stuff would be in the garage, and she needed to set up a time to come get it. Her response was a string of curse words and threats about what she'd do to me and my stuff if I didn't let her back in the house. Around midnight, the banging started on my front door so loud it shook the whole frame. I looked through the peephole and saw Carly pounding with both fists while yelling about her legal rights to the house. The porch light at the house across the street clicked on, and then another 1-2 doors down. More light started coming on as she kept screaming that I couldn't lock her out of her own home. I opened the door just enough to tell her she needed to leave right now, or I'd call the cops. She pushed against the door, trying to force her way in, but I held it firm and told her again to go. She called me pathetic and said Raul was twice the man I'd ever be before finally stomping back to her car and peeling out of the driveway. The next morning, I sat in Fiona's office while she looked over the notes from our previous couples sessions. She said she wasn't totally surprised by what happened because she'd noticed how Carly always changed the subject when we talked about boundaries and trust. She offered to help us talk things through if we both agreed to it. Later that day, Luke came over with boxes, and we started packing up Carly's stuff from the bedroom. In the back of the closet, we found a bottle of men's cologne that wasn't mine and a leather belt I'd never seen before. The dresser drawer had fancy lingerie still with price tags from a store near the Marriott downtown. Each new thing we found felt like discovering another piece of the lie she'd been living. Luke shook his head and helped me tape up the boxes, while I tried not to think about what else she might have hidden from me. 3 days later, Fiona called to say Carly agreed to a session, but only if Raul could join on video from his phone. We sat in her office while Fiona connected the call on her laptop, and Raul's face appeared on screen looking uncomfortable. Carly sat there with her arms crossed while Fiona asked her to explain her perspective on the situation. She said she never planned to stop seeing Raul, but thought she could have both relationships at the same time. When Fiona asked why she went through with the wedding knowing this, Carly shrugged and said she didn't want to disappoint her family who'd already paid for everything. Raul interrupted at that point and said Carly had told him we'd already broken up but were doing the wedding just for show. He looked directly at the camera and apologized to me, saying he never would have been part of this if he'd known the truth about us still being together. Carly's face turned red, and she started arguing with him about what she'd actually said, but he kept shaking his head. He said she'd lied to both of us and he was done with the whole situation before ending the video call. I pulled out the separation agreement Nolan had written up that listed all our wedding gifts and the stuff we'd bought together. Carly grabbed it and started reading while her face got more and more angry. She threw it back at me and said she deserved half the value of the house, even though she'd never paid a single mortgage payment. Fiona suggested we take a break and try again another day when everyone was calmer. That night I saw Carly's posts on social media talking about toxic monogamy culture and how she was finally living her truth. She made it sound like she was some kind of hero for following her heart, but left out the part where she'd lied to everyone. My phone started buzzing with texts from friends asking what was going on and if we'd really split up already. I decided not to respond to any of them and definitely wasn't going to argue with her online for everyone to see. The next morning, I went to the bank to separate our joint accounts that I'd been stupid enough to add her name to after we got engaged. The bank manager pulled up the records and showed that every single deposit had come from my paychecks, while Carly had never put in a dime. She helped me remove Carly's name and set up new accounts with just me on them, handling everything professionally like she'd seen this exact situation before. That afternoon, my phone rang with a number I recognized as Carly's parents' house. Her mom started talking immediately about how Carly said I was controlling and jealous and wouldn't let her have any friends. I interrupted and said I'd send them something that might help them understand what really happened. I emailed them the credit card statements showing all the hotel charges and attached the Ring doorbell videos of Raul coming to the house. They didn't respond for over an hour until her dad sent a text that just said he was sorry. Later that week, Chelsea picked me up and drove us to a community center where she'd found a support group for people dealing with cheating and betrayal. I sat in a circle with about 10 other people while they shared their stories of finding out about affairs and lies. One woman talked about her husband's double life for 5 years, and another guy described finding his wife's dating profiles while they were trying for a baby. Hearing their stories made me realize Carly's behavior wasn't unique and actually fit a pattern that the group leader called deceptive narcissism. Everyone nodded when I described how she acted like I was the problem for being upset about her lies. The validation from strangers who'd been through similar stuff helped more than all the advice from friends who couldn't really understand what this felt like. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from Raul saying he'd ended things with Carly after figuring out the truth about everything. He wrote that she'd tried to convince him I was abusive and controlling, which is why she needed him for emotional support. But he saw through the lies when her stories kept changing. The manipulation went way deeper than I'd thought, and reading his message made me realize how lucky I was that he had enough sense to see what was really happening. I decided to get the house professionally cleaned because I needed every trace of the past few months gone from my space. The cleaning crew showed up early Saturday morning with their equipment and spent 6 hours scrubbing every surface while I supervised and pointed out areas that needed extra attention. They changed all the sheets and reorganized the closets, and somehow having fresh linens and clean floors made the house feel like mine again, instead of a place where lies had been living. My phone started blowing up with texts from Carly saying the ATM wouldn't give her more than $50 when she tried to withdraw cash. I'd already called the bank and lowered the daily limit on the card she still had because I wasn't about to fund whatever she was doing now. She sent message after message about needing money for a hotel room, and I finally responded that she should ask Raul since that's where she'd been staying all those Tuesday and Thursday nights. The second mediation session with Fiona happened 3 days later, and Carly showed up with some woman she introduced as her relationship coach, who immediately started talking about how polyamory was natural and healthy. Fiona shut that down real quick by explaining that ethical non-monogamy requires consent from everyone involved, which never happened here since I didn't know about any of it. The so-called coach kept trying to argue, but Fiona maintained her professional stance and reminded everyone we were there to discuss the dissolution of the marriage, not debate relationship philosophies. Nolan helped me file the annulment paperwork the next morning, citing fraud as the ground since Carly had entered the marriage under false pretenses. The process server found her at her sister's house that afternoon, and apparently she grabbed the papers and threw them right at his face before slamming the door, so hard the neighbors came out to see what was happening. She'd 30 days to respond, but we both knew she'd fight it just to make things difficult. Luke and Chelsea organized a get-together at their place that weekend with about 8 of our closest friends who all wanted to show support. People started sharing stories about red flags they'd noticed before the wedding, like how Carly always had her phone face down, or how she'd disappear for hours without explanation. It hurt hearing that others saw warning signs I'd missed, but it also felt good knowing I wasn't crazy for feeling like something had been off. Carly's lawyer sent her response to the annulment 2 weeks later, contesting everything, and actually demanding spousal support for a marriage that lasted less than a week. Nolan literally laughed out loud when he read it, and said this was pure desperation tactics that no judge would take seriously given all the evidence we had. We filed our response with confidence, knowing the facts were completely on our side. Going back to work felt weird at first, but when I explained the situation to my boss, she was incredibly understanding and told me to take whatever time I needed for court dates and lawyer meetings. My coworkers were surprisingly supportive too, and having the normal routine of meetings and deadlines actually helped me feel grounded again. The locksmith who'd changed my locks called to check how things were going and suggested I add security cameras since he'd seen situations like mine turn ugly before. That same afternoon, a tech came and installed cameras covering the front door and back entrance and driveway, and somehow knowing everything was recorded made me feel way safer in my own home. 3 weeks after the whole mess started, the judge granted the annulment based on fraud after reviewing all the evidence, including the credit card statements and hotel receipts and Ring doorbell footage. The judge specifically noted the extensive pattern of deception and the extremely short duration of the marriage as factors in the decision. Carly didn't even show up to court and just sent her lawyer, who looked embarrassed to be representing such a ridiculous case. Walking out of that courthouse felt like the first day of getting my life back, and I actually smiled for real for the first time in weeks. The therapy office was on the third floor of a medical building downtown, and I sat in the waiting room filling out forms about my mental health history. The therapist was a woman in her 50s with gray hair who listened without judgment as I explained everything that happened with Carly and Raul. She handed me tissues when I started crying halfway through, even though I'd promised myself I wouldn't get emotional. We scheduled weekly sessions, and she gave me homework to write down 3 things I was grateful for each day, which seemed stupid, but I did it anyway. 2 days later, a package arrived with no return address, but I recognized Carly's handwriting on the label. Inside was the wedding ring wrapped in a note that said, "Shove this where the sun doesn't shine," written in red marker. I drove straight to the jeweler who'd sold it to me, and he offered $800 for it, which was less than I paid, but better than nothing. The money went into a new savings account I labeled Freedom Fund for a trip I wanted to take alone. My sleep got better gradually, and after 3 weeks I stopped waking up at 2 a.m. thinking about finding them together. The house started feeling normal again instead of like some crime scene I had to live in. I bought new sheets and threw out anything that reminded me of her, including that stupid throw pillow with our wedding date embroidered on it. The walls got repainted from that blue she'd picked to a warm gray I actually liked. I hung up concert posters from bands she'd always hated and put my guitar back in the living room where she'd banned it. My phone buzzed one morning with a message from Raul saying he wanted to thank me for exposing the truth about Carly. He explained she'd tried to get him back after the annulment, but he recognized her manipulation tactics now and blocked her. He mentioned starting therapy himself and wished me well before saying we probably shouldn't stay in contact. I deleted his number and felt one more weight lift off my shoulders. The travel agent helped me book a week in Costa Rica at an adventure resort with zip lining and whitewater rafting. Carly had always called those kinds of trips boring and insisted on beach resorts where she could take Instagram photos. The flight was smooth, and the first morning I stood on a platform 100 feet up in the rainforest canopy. The zip line stretched out through the trees, and my hands shook a little as they hooked me up to the cable. Flying through the air with monkeys calling from the branches felt like freedom in its purest form. Every activity that week pushed me out of my comfort zone in the best way possible. Coming home from the trip, my house felt welcoming instead of empty for the first time since everything exploded. Work picked up with a new project that kept me busy and engaged instead of dwelling on the past. The hiking group I joined through a coworker met every Saturday morning at different trails around the area. Most of the people were divorced or single, and nobody asked too many personal questions, which suited me perfectly. My routine settled into something comfortable with therapy on Wednesdays and hiking on weekends and work keeping me focused during the week. Luke texted asking if Chelsea and I could come over for dinner because they had news to share. Their dining room table was set with the good china, and Chelsea kept touching her stomach in that way pregnant women do. They announced the pregnancy, and then Luke asked if I'd be the godfather to their kid. Chelsea said they wanted their child to know someone who stood up for what was right even when it was hard. My eyes got watery, and I had to look away for a second before accepting their offer. 8 weeks had passed since my 18-hour marriage imploded, and somehow I'd survived it all. The house payment came out of my account alone, just like before she'd moved in. My credit score recovered from the hits it took during the wedding planning chaos. The therapist helped me see the red flags I'd ignored and how to spot them earlier next time. Looking at my life objectively, it was actually better than before I'd met Carly in almost every way. Well, folks, that's it from me today. Thanks for sticking with me and letting me throw my thoughts and questions out there along the way. I really appreciate it. Like the video, it helps more than you think.